Good afternoon or good morning, good day to infection control listeners. Yeah, I like that one, Martin.
I do.
Welcome to our latest episode of Infection Control Matters. And we're going to be talking about, a bit of a theme about bacteraemias and BSI surveillance in this. And we've got two papers.
Yeah, I came across one back in January that I was interested in, and it's sort of been compounded by another paper you just spotted from the Journal of Hospital Infection. The one I'll talk about first is from ARIC. So naturally, it's an open access paper, which is very nice. It's from Rüther and colleagues in Berlin. They've done a retrospective study following hospital-wide implementation of an automated surveillance system. So they look back over 5 years of hospital-onset bacteraemia. Very fortunately, they've got systems that talk to each other, so that was very helpful for them. So they're actually able to look at their patient admissions. They've got their dates of admission and discharge. They've got a data warehouse with structured data about patient movements and ward transfers. It's got micro results like blood cultures, all the patient demographics, and some outcomes like death. I mean, they don't go much further than that. So I thought this was quite an interesting piece of work because actually they came up with some really good, I think, useful data. I mean, they looked at over 3.5 million patient days. They had over 7,000 hospital-acquired or hospital-onset bloodstream infections, over 8,000 different organisms. Pull rate is 6 per 1,000 patient days. And interestingly, naturally, places like critical care, intensive care are the highest, but about a third of these infections were considered to be potentially secondary, with the respiratory tract as the number one source of the infection in the first place.
Now, so just let's pause on that for a minute. So a third was secondary, approximately.
A third was secondary, and a third of those, just over about 40% of those, were respiratory tract related.
Yeah, so that's interesting because my gut feel, the secondary doesn't particularly surprise me, the figure, but 40-odd% of secondary infections being from hospital-acquired pneumonia is interesting.
Yeah.
Because we know, of course, that pneumonia is one of the most common infections in hospital.
Well, in fact, the most.
In fact, it is.
In every prevalence study anywhere ever done in the world. Yeah. Well, recently anyway, it used to be UTI, but now it's pneumonia.
Without reading that beforehand, would you have guessed urine? Urine is probably one of the main sources.
Do you know, no, I wouldn't these days. If you'd taken me back 10 years ago, until we really started to spot all these hospital-acquired pneumonias, I would have said, oh yeah, catheters are always the number one healthcare-associated infection. But that's not the case now. You know,
what about peripheral devices? You think that?
Yeah, well, there's some issue with that. I think we've got better at that though, because I think we're better at spotting peripheral line issues.
Well, that actually might be the primary cause anyway. Not
that's true. But I mean, what I would say is things like the focus on MRSA in places like the UK, where infections came down over 90% because people started to look after their lines better. I think people generally have got better at looking after lines, and also I think thanks to people like Claire Rickard, there's a fairly good evidence base now for what you do with intravenous lines. Whereas I'm not sure we've got that with pneumonia, and I'm not sure we've got engagement with pneumonia, and we'll probably return to that topic in probably just a few weeks' time.
I think we might.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing, though, pneumonia is common. So a third and then maybe 40% of those. So what we're really talking about is 10% of BSIs overall being related to pneumonia. Now, that's on top of the existing burden that pneumonia has, which...
Yeah, but it doesn't go as far as BSI.
No. It's regular papers from Cassini and others, and, the burden is more significant for hospital-acquired pneumonia than any other hospital-acquired infection, and more so than many other infectious diseases. But this actually adds additional weight on top of that because of the bloodstream infection risk.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like hospital-onset bloodstream infections actually as a metric. And when I was in clinical practice a few years ago, I did do it because generally all positive blood cultures are followed up by a microbiologist. Generally, people are written up antibiotics for a reason. I mean, it may not always fit a surveillance definition, but we clinically, we felt we knew what was going on. So we were able to target areas in the organisation where they seem to have more hospital-onset bloodstream infections. I think sometimes it gives us a better reflection of overall hospital infection burden. And the automated is interesting, isn't it? Because I was doing it manually. If you're doing it automated, then it's a little bit more objective. Is it actual? Because this was retrospective, I don't know, but we'll come on to that one in a little minute. anything that can reduce our workload, because it does take a lot of shoe leather going around the place looking at infections, and if you can take that out, that helps. So I think it's interesting. I mean, it doesn't tell us anything we don't know about, that the ICU is the biggest risk, but it also highlights the fact that just your general wards are anything but low risk, especially for a lot of the pneumonias that are not device associated. So I thought it was quite interesting. The secondary infections, it was respiratory, some urine, that's fine. And it also gives you a pretty good idea of what proportion of these infections are actually MDRO. And in the case of this, it was 13% of all the hospital-onset bloodstream infections were an MDRO, the biggest group being Acinetobacter baumannii. So, that's an indication going forward as well. If you just pull it out automatically, I think it helps.
Yeah, it does. That is. And having these longitudinal type data sets are also useful too.
Yeah.
Okay, so the paper that
we're going to segue into a more recent paper.
Actually, it's probably published a similar time. It's just come out in Journal of Hospital Infection in terms of the issue, but it's been in press since December.
Yeah.
So this one is called The Potential of Centrally Implemented System for National Surveillance of Bloodstream Infections in England. Cregan was the lead author with a bunch of colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, this is from Oxford, and it's from the UKHSA, which is the United Kingdom Health Security Agency in London.
And
they have been doing mandatory surveillance for certain things for years, but not this. So.
Yes, absolutely. A long history of that. I remember when I was working in the UK, we were doing the bloodstream infections. At that time, I think it was limited to Staph aureus bacteremia. But so what they wanted to do was compare a centrally coordinated, automated approach to surveillance against the traditional method, where hospitals are required to submit their data directly. And so it's more of a manual process, I guess, line by line entering or providing that information.
And I know from past experience that it can be a very painful experience.
Yeah. And of course, this is not just Staph aureus bacteremia. This did include other bacteremias as well. So, and so they wanted to compare, how good was this automated surveillance against what would be deemed as the gold standard by people manually doing it and submitting that data.
I mean, England are lucky in this case because people do submit their data electronically now. So they get data, UKHSA get electronic data on patient demographics, and they get the microbiology results. That's all they get.
Yeah.
But they do at least get something automatically.
Yes. And so this automation system that was compared was comparing routinely collected laboratory data with hospital encounter records, so essentially administrative records. And the period was 2023-24 financial year. So that they looked at was ultimately 73,800 odd bloodstream infections or bacteremias. And the automated surveillance side of things was really accurate, 98.2%. And that is quite remarkable, actually. That's really good. And then of the ones that were mismatched, a decent proportion of those were potentially attributed to some misclassification at one laboratory and some of the perhaps metadata algorithms that they were providing. So what I'd say is that could well be much higher.
Yeah,
well,
not much higher.
A lot higher.
98%.
Yeah.
So it's only got 2% to go to be 100.
So it was pretty consistent across E. coli, Klebsiella, Staph aureus, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And there was high congruence between that automated system and manual process for all of those different infection or pathogen causing infection types. The other interesting thing that they found was that the centrally generated, the automation process was more complete when it came to the metadata fields. So essentially there was more accurate, more complete data, I should say, provided by the automated process rather than the manual process, where there was a fair bit more missing data. Conversely, there's a challenge with automated related data making inferences about certain things and how accurate that might be. But you got to weigh up that degree of accuracy against a whole bunch of missing data.
I do wonder whether people putting the data in manually have actually got access to all of the hospital systems that UKHSA might have access to.
That's-
Because I know from personal experience that your access to data depends on the licenses that your organisation has bought and whether you can go and see those or not. So it's possible that what you have to submit centrally may not even be as available in your own organisation. That was a little thought that wandered through there as to why, I can't imagine that people can't be bothered, but have they got access to it, or is it incomplete because they're trying to do it at the time and they don't have access to all the data, and they then don't go back and complete all the fields. Whereas when UKHSA do their extract, they've actually got access to all the fields. Is there something going on there? I don't know.
And, I started the talk by saying, for the purposes of the comparison, that the gold standard was manual, but the authors do make an important point. That a key studying finding is that locally implemented surveillance cannot be considered as gold standard traditionally. There are 1,000 bacteraemias that were identified in essentially implemented surveillance program that were not reported by the local teams.
Yeah.
So whilst you have to make a call when you're doing comparisons about which one's going to be better than what, it also shows some of the limitations, not just with the missing data, but perhaps bacteraemias not being identified locally or reported locally.
Yeah, or possibly systems crash internally. Maybe you don't get access to it at that time, and then it becomes available later. And again, that's uploaded more centrally. So, I think that's got a lot of potential, this, though, because that's a massive data set on a national basis. You can have a really good look at trends.
And not just, one pathogen.
No.
And the amount of time it can take to collate manual records to check those. And sometimes there's all the internal processes that you want to go through to validate those locally before you send them off to the government. Taking that step out will also free up a lot of resources.
Yeah.
Or some resources, I should say, for infection control teams, which is really important.
And also, to me, you actually can look at almost antibiotic resistance patterns flow around the country almost in real time, depending on how often you do this little look. So
this will be the beauty of it. Some of the key for this and the paper that you mentioned too, Martin, is how real time you can get it.
Yeah.
And if these systems can get to a point where they are ultimately pretty much real time, or I guess you probably, with this type of system we just described, it's probably hard to get that real time because they'll be using probably encounters once a person's gone home. But if you could get it even to really close to a point of post-discharge, enables you to provide relatively good reporting back locally.
Yeah.
It may not inform your direct feedback on any given day to a particular ward unit person, but it might enable that faster reporting, not the lag times, and have the bonus of having this done in an automated way and be able to compare and see where you're sitting for like.
And looking internally within your organisation as well. You can look at a trend for a particular ward or department over a 6-month period, look at it, see if it's going in any particular direction or another. I think back to that podcast we did with Eiling Wolfensberger, looking at their semi-automated HAP surveillance. And they weren't doing it in real time, although the potential was there to do it, but they felt the numbers were so small that actually doing it in real time wouldn't make much of a difference. Could you build a system that actually triggers that? Actually, it does seem to be going up at the moment. Therefore, maybe now's the time to jump in rather than doing it quarterly, 6 monthly. I don't know. It's exciting, I think.
It is exciting. Actually, I digress a bit, but all these sort of systems allow relatively real-time data, and information on trends, I think, is always useful. There was a paper that I wrote in Infection Disease and Health last year, and it was about an accelerometer that you could put onto soap and alcohol dispensers. And it can, with the accelerometer technology and the algorithms you can develop, you can determine when the movement reflected such as someone pushing down into squirting something out. Now, whilst the usage has got problems and it's not a marker for compliance or correct procedure, I still think it's a useful long-term trend. So what the idea there was, on a dashboard, you could have all your wards and real-time data on, is anything empty? Because you would know how many times something's been squirted, but also what the usage was. So if you had an outbreak on the ward, you might go, okay, we've got an outbreak on the ward. Is hand hygiene a problem? Well, our usage hasn't changed in the last 3 months. So maybe that's not the first thing we need to worry about.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something else. Or it has actually dipped. We need to go and intervene now on that particular.
I think Mark Garvey in Birmingham's got some way of looking at actual consumption by how much ordering's going on, that sort of stuff. And he reckons they can sort of predict when things are going to go slightly wrong. Because, I mean, what you don't do in the case of counting pumps is let the staff on the ward know that you're actually monitoring how many times they pump it.
No.
Instead of one squirt of alcohol hand rub, they're about 5 or 6.
Yes.
And then
It's not about and it's
Yeah.
about that long-term trend, right? So it's
Yeah, it
embedded
is,
into the system.
Yeah.
You're not interested. That's going to iron out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
People
get bored.
People get bored and they'll go back to
Or
it.
also having to rub your hands for 4 hours to try and get rid of all the alcohol hand rub.
Or just flick it on the ground and
Or
get the
just
sticky
flick it on,
floors.
yeah.
So I guess we're talking about Mark's system is that one step above that again, where you could actually have
or maybe even one step below, he
places.
might just get ordering data from the supplies department.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
We'll see him in a few weeks in Munich. We can ask him.
We can ask him then. Always good chatting, Martin.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you very much to Sally Bloomfield for commenting on the last High Touch Point paper, because she made some interesting points which are available on the Podbean website, and it's nice to know we have a listener.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sally.
And some great comments too.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.